Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to call to order this meeting, or this work session of the Washington County Board of Education. This is a work session. No formal action will be taken at this meeting. We are here to discuss the 2023 Educational Facilities Master Plan update. You should have a binder, and you should also have received in your Friday packet a copy of the PowerPoint presentation. So, all that said, I'll turn things over to Dr. Sovine. Dr. Sovine?
Thank you, President Williams. As you referenced, it is that time of year where we go through the annual process of updating our educational facilities master plan. I want to take a moment to thank Mr. Prue, Mr. Rollins, and Mr. Criswell for their work. Very extensive work that does not occur just at this time of the year, but in most cases, much like the budget, throughout the course of the year. I know we started our serious conversations several months ago, 3 to 4 months, maybe a little bit more. And the Board of Education a few weeks ago received this very detailed document, thanks to our team members that, working with information not only here locally, but with county government and other resources, we make this update. And certainly I appreciate their work. Now I'll turn it over to Mr. Prue. We do have a formal presentation and a couple points to highlight, and then we'll open it up in work session format for questions or comments by the board. Mr. Prue.
Thank you, Dr. Sovine. Good afternoon, board members. As a reminder again, the Educational Facilities Master Plan is a document required by the State Department of Education, the Facilities Planning Division, as well as the Interagency Commission on School Construction. It has to be approved by the board every year and turned into the state by the end of June, which is why we always go through it in this cycle. And it is one of 3 books really in a series of plans that our facilities and maintenance teams do. This document leads into our capital improvement plan, which you'll be receiving in the fall, in September, and we'll present that formally to you for approval in September. Has to be to the State Department of Education and again the IAC, Interagency Commission on School Construction, by the end of September. And then in October, we always present you with our comprehensive maintenance plan. So it's sort of how do we plan for facilities, how do we do the facility capital upgrades, and then how do we maintain our facilities as sort of a 3-part series. Again, the EFMP evaluates our community. We look at where we have updated developments and where our enrollments are going to be coming from, where the enrollment pressures may be on certain school facilities. We assess our facilities we look at that inventory and establish sort of baselines and rating systems for how are our facilities performing and where are our greatest needs within those facilities. We look at our board policies. We update this report, of course, annually. As we just mentioned, it's due to the state annually. And we try to put forth to you while this document doesn't really get into the nitty-gritty of the dollars and cents, that's really left to the capital improvement plan. We do kind of, on our side, look at that to make sure that we're putting a fiscally responsible plan in front of the board that makes the most sense of how we would use taxpayer dollars that are available to us. And as I previously mentioned, it is the basis for the 5-year capital improvement plan, or what we affectionately call this just simply the CIP. Talking about our current infrastructure, the Board of Education is entrusted with the care of 47 schools. We have land area of 1,119 acres to maintain, and we maintain nearly 3.5 million square feet under roof across those 47 facilities. And that does not include other facilities like, for instance, our transportation center over at 820 Commonwealth Avenue, or this building, the Center for Education Services, which are additional to all of that. We'll always, as we put this forth, we always share with you, the ideal preventative maintenance schedule for buildings and major systems, because that is the basis of how we look at the capital improvement plan and the EFMP. In our buildings, if we've got 47 school buildings and the estimated life of a school building, either before full modernization, renovation, or new construction is approximately 50 years. On average, we should be replacing a school about once a year. We should be opening a new school once a year. Roofs, we typically plan for a 20-year life, boiler systems 30 years, chilling systems 25 to 30, HVAC systems 25 to 30, and electrical distribution every 30 years. And as the infrastructure ages, we put a stress on all of those. And so we highlight again that the building should be one every 50 years, and this plan does not bring that forward to you. It's also part of saying we're going to bring you a fiscally responsible plan in terms of how we think we can make use of available funds and what funds might be available. And this plan doesn't do that for you, but it does highlight a number of systems, and we should note that actually with our COVID relief funds over the last number of years, we've been able to pull some of our capital improvement infrastructure out of the EFMP and out of the traditional capital improvement program because we've been able to use some of our ESSER 3 capital COVID relief funds to handle a number of projects like the HVAC system at Marshall Street and at Williamsport High School, which will begin this summer. Again, looking at the EFMP in terms of overall scope, Chapter 1 looks at our goals, standards, and guidelines. Number 2 is our community analysis, our developments. 3 is our inventory and evaluation of the current facilities. Chapter 4 is your enrollment data, and Chapter 5 summarizes in terms of where we are with our facility analysis. And I think with that, I'm going to turn it over to Rob and Chad.
So as Mr. Prue referenced, Chapter 2, it deals with the community analysis. As Dr. Sovine previously stated and Jeff previously stated, we do work with the county and the city of Hagerstown, local municipalities, and we go through and review all the development data. We do that throughout the year. As we get those updates for specific developments, we share those with the facility committee, so they get to see those as they come in, but then everything is compiled into this document this time of year so the entire board can see everything. The map that's on the current slide shows all the current active and inactive developments of major subdivisions within the county. That's any subdivision that has more than 7 dwelling units. We're aware of every potential one through the county and the municipalities. We also go through in that chapter and look at some of the demographics of the county. One of the things that's kind of interesting in 10 years between 2010 and 2020, the census recorded that the county experienced a 6,600 person growth. So obviously that translates over some to students, but as we'll get into in Chapter 4, I'll explain a little bit of how we look at that information and how we consider it. With new housing starts this past year, we did see a little bit of an increase in housing starts within the county. Now, a lot of that was attributed to the Rosewood PUD, where we saw their final phase come through for some apartments. But we saw a slight increase in the single-family homes, so we're kind of excited about that. But with interest rates going up and some of the other things that are occurring, it's going to be interesting to see how that transcends into the coming years and what impact that might have on enrollment when we get to Chapter 4 to talk about the enrollment projections. So in Chapter 2, in the community analysis, we go through each high school service area. In each high school service area, we give a map of the area along with all the developments in those areas and the current status. So we can tell you how many units are currently in concept phase, how many have final plat, and essentially could get a permit tomorrow or are under construction or have persons residing within them. So that is all identified in Chapter 2, and then that'll come back in Chapter 5 a little later on.
Okay, in Chapter 3, we evaluate both the physical and functional characteristics of our school buildings. The physical characteristics are systems, building envelope, the bricks and mortar, the boilers, the chillers, all the things that we need to have a facility that functions physically. The functional evaluation looks at educational sufficiency and school day operations. So there we're looking at numbers, types of classrooms, the size of the classrooms, are they adequate? Is there adequate storage in the classrooms? We're also looking at subject learning, specific spaces for specific subjects, science, special ed, media center, art and music, phys ed, small group instruction, the administration area, health suites, custodial support, all those things that make the school function as a school, not the physical function, but as a school itself. The state is also looking at evaluating these same characteristics of schools on their own. I just wanted to point that out. They so far are limited to looking at physical characteristics of our schools, They haven't published anything to the general public anyway on how those evaluations are coming out, but we're keeping an eye on them and making sure that their evaluations mirror or at least look as much like ours as possible. Also willing to have an open mind, and if they find something that we missed, we would look at that too. We may include that state information in future EFMPs, but to date, the state hasn't looked at the functional characteristics yet, the sufficiency characteristics, and their model is to bring all that together like we have been doing for many years. When they get to their point where they're finished with their evaluation, I think that's the time to start sharing it in our EFMP, because those evaluations could affect the funding, where they aim funding at in our county. Also in Chapter 3, there's a lot of useful data in there. So we have seat capacity and utilization of each school, renovation history, and the number and types of building systems that are in each school.
So as we come to Chapter 4 in the document, this is really where the enrollment data or enrollment projections are really kind of flushed out. Now, every year we work with our consultant, Public Pathways Incorporated, to create enrollment projections. We take the preliminary numbers through administrative staff here at the central office. We also take preliminary numbers through each school principal, so we can make sure we're taking into account anything that we would not be aware of from just numbers on sheets. We want to make sure we're aware of any type of changes that are occurring out at the facilities. So we take all those comments that we receive into account, and then we create our initial enrollment projections. And then in March, we'll typically receive from the state of Maryland, the Maryland Department of Planning, their enrollment projections. We will submit our K through 12 projections, and as long as we're within 5% of Maryland Department of Planning's, they allow us to use our projections within the EFMP and for future funding funding components. So in this document, we're utilizing the enrollment projections that we generated in consultation with the county, in consultation with the principals, and we're within the 5% of the Maryland Department of Planning. The sheet that you received, in addition to your EFMP, is this two-page sheet here. This is the one I typically use throughout the year, and basically it gives the total for each WCPS facility. If you go through Chapter 4 and you want a little bit more detail, you can go in and you can look at the grade-to-grade change for the next 10 years or through 2032 for each facility. If you really want to get fancy, you can take a ruler and you can kind of lay it at an angle, and you can see, okay, in first grade this year we had 100 students. In second grade next year we're expecting 102 or 98, whether we're going to see a 2% or a increase or decrease. That's part of the cohort survivorship method that we utilize to generate our enrollment projections. We utilize that sliding scale along with birth rates that we see within the county. And this is included in the Chapter 4 document. So looking back at 2008, that was the last time we had over 1,800 births within this county. The Maryland Department of Planning provides us this information. It's recorded for all birth mothers within the country that list a zip code within Washington County. They record it. They provide the information to it. And then we go in and we look at how many kindergartners will show up 5 years later. We try to use this information to determine what kindergarten size class we're going to see. In 2013, you can see 5 years later, we saw 91% of those students that were born in 2008 show up. So that was pretty typical. We typically see between 0.88 to 1.01 number of birth students show up 5 years later. We mentioned about how we do this every year in 6 months. If you want me to ruin your day, it kind of ruined mine earlier today when I realized that the students that were born in 2008 are currently ninth graders. Next year they'll be driving. So that kind of hurt a little bit when I thought back to what I was doing here in 2008. I was working on Mulligansville and Barbara Ingram School for the Arts, and those children that were born are going to be driving next year. So that was a little bit of a wake-up call for how quick time passes. But where it does become important for us is looking at the birth rates moving forward. The projections that we do out through 2032, those students haven't been born yet. They're 4 years away from being born. So every year we come back with projections, we could see significant changes, especially as we move further out in time and as more data becomes available. So when we go through and we look at the enrollment in our projection charts, anytime we get out past the following year, it's certainly subject to significant changes as we move forward. But looking to where we're going to be next year, we do expect to see a slight increase. We're expecting to be up a total of about 218 students. The majority of that's coming in our pre-K through 5 grades. And of that, about, I'm going to say 87 are anticipated to be in the pre-kindergarten grade, leaving about 85 or so K to 5 students that we would see an increase. We're probably going to be pretty flat at the middle school level, and then we're expecting to see a slight increase at the high school level. And that's probably going to be the last increase we see at the high school level for a little while as we move forward, unless there's significant changes in migration or anything that occurs that would change that. As we go forward to 2032, over the next 10 years, we're expecting to see a countywide growth of just under 1,000 students. And again, as we see things change, as we pay attention to the number of developments that occur, the number of new housing starts, the number of births that occur coming up in the future, we could see this number go up or down in the future. Our hope is that we see it go up, but right now we're on a steady, slow incline of growth, which is not a bad position to be in.
Okay, chapter 5 is where we use the data collected and all the other chapters to formulate our capital project recommendations to the board. Just a reminder that about the age and conditions of our schools. We have 25 of our 47 schools, more than half, will exceed 50 years without a major renovation in the next 10 years. In that same time frame, 75% will have exceeded 50 years in age since they were originally constructed. It's just a marker that I think we all need to continue to acknowledge as we move forward and make our plans. In consultation with the superintendent, this EFMP circles back to a plan for capital renewal replacement similar to plans we presented in the past with a little bit of a twist. We have some secondary schools in this plan as well. The plan proposes 5 major school projects that would replace 10 of our schools, our current facilities, in a 13-year span. The first project on that list is Downsville Pike Elementary School. As you know, from the superintendent's report recommending the closure of Hickory and Fountain Rock Elementary Schools, this project's been on the radar for some time. Various meetings have been held, including the presentation of the report to the board, and the board is currently scheduling a public hearing on the closing of these schools contingent on the opening of the new Downsville Pike Elementary School. As outlined in the report, the closure of the 2 schools and the construction of opening of a single new school will result in substantial savings in both construction and operating dollars. The new school, if approved to move forward, would open in 2027. It's a 79,000 square foot facility with capacity for 628 students. Total estimated cost of around $45 million. The school would use the Built to Learn Act funding, which is a one-time funding source from the state. That would require, if we move forward with this plan, we would need to develop a memorandum of understanding with the Board of Education, the Board of County Commissioners, and the Maryland Stadium Authority. We would also be seeking approval from the state within this year's CIP for local planning. Total funding for this project to get to $45 million would be about $19 million from the Built to Learn Act through the Maryland Stadium Authority bonds. The State Capital Improvement Program would add another $9 to $10 million. And as noted, it represents the balance of the maximum state allocation we can get for this school. And then locally, we'd need to inject almost $17 million into the project. Second school on this 5-school plan would be another elementary school. This one would combine Greenbrier and Old Forge Elementary Schools. It would open in 2029, so it would be similar in scope and size and maybe cost a little more due to inflation, but similar in cost to the Downsville Pike Elementary School. We may be able to develop a prototype when we build this school that we could reuse the design. That's dependent on many factors, including educational program changes and the actual site that we get to put that school on. The third project is a secondary school project. In discussions with the superintendent, it was determined we should also be focusing on these secondary schools. So we're recommending a new middle high school to replace the current para facilities at either Smithsburg or Clear Spring. Just like elementary schools, combining schools to share core spaces and create efficiencies that will lower the cost of construction and operations. So it's just like our elementary schools when we're taking two, putting it into one. We're very early in the development of this project, and we're just thinking it through, but we envision about a 1,500 state-rated capacity, seat capacity, estimated 215,000 square foot facility, tentatively opening in 2032. The cost for this would be around $120 million. This would be the largest school in the system, and it would cost more than anything we've ever built, but those shared core spaces that lower the overall cost are going to make this building cost less than if we built two separate schools. If we replaced them.
I want to mention and add to the comments and logic and rationale behind this. I mentioned in my opening statements that when we started looking at our needs, it was clear in talking with team members that our greatest need clearly was at the secondary level. All of our middle schools were built roughly in the 70s with no major renovation, and most of our high schools, not all, but most are very similar. Recognizing, as Mr. Rollins has said, a secondary project is always going to be one of the most expensive projects for a school division, and which requires funding and support. Fortunately, the structures are such where we have significant state funding, which almost drives it to the point where it's would be almost remiss not to do the local match. But also kind of looking at the challenges with the backlog. I had asked staff to really look at some creative ways, and we discussed the possibilities of combining a middle school and high school project, recognizing that we have a couple campus style that are already in place, and that would at least allow us to engage in discussion. We identified a couple Maryland districts in Cecil and Hartford that had just recently, within the last year or two, that have successfully done this. We mentioned the cost savings, and you're talking about, in most cases, 30% or more cost savings, which I think is pretty significant and a good use of taxpayer dollars when you look at something that will be around for a period of time. If you look at our current bank of facilities, nearly half of them are right around 50 years or more. So it's just something for a point of discussion, but I think as you look at our master plan, you see the most significant need is at the secondary level.
One other bonus of building a combined school at this scale would be that we may be able to offer enrollment relief to some of the schools in the center of the county. And that's why I caution on the size of the school. It's very preliminary, and we would have to look at enrollment holistically throughout the county to determine the actual best size, and also a size that the state will support with their dollars for full funding. So a lot of this is up in the air. This is a starting point, and we'll move out from here. So I just want to caution everybody that nothing that you see on this screen is set in stone, and we'll figure it out as we move forward with the board's guidance. The fourth school would be another elementary school. This one could end up being any number of combinations, but in our EF&P, we're targeting Fountaindale and Potomac Heights as the next schools on the list to consolidate. And this one would open in 2023. And then the fifth project is another secondary school. If we did Smithsburg first, this may be Clear Spring or vice versa, depending on when we do them. And this school would open in 2036. So that is the plan for those 5 schools. I think it's doable. It's a lot, but if you look back from 2005 to 2016, the Board of County Commissioners and the Board of Ed built 11 school facilities. So it's not like it's a number of facilities that we haven't done in that kind of time frame in the past. So I think it is something that is doable. Finally, we never lose sight of the need for systemic renovations. In this report, in this EFMP, for fiscal year 25, we would be asking the state for funding for 3 HVAC replacements. Those schools, you can see how old the systems are in those schools, and so we need to get them replaced. And then following from fiscal year 26 to 33, we continue with some more systemic projects, 5 roof replacements, some heating and ventilation replacements, and some boiler and chiller replacements.
I think, we always kind of finish this presentation with a roll back to the front. Again, reminder to the board that no decision you make on this report is permanent. It is something that we review and present alternatives to you annually. So a vote that you may make next month to approve this report can be undone within 12 months as we move forward and think about the 2024 EFMP. But these decisions you do make today will impact how we present the 5-year capital improvement plan in September for your approval, and then for the county's consideration in their 10-year capital plan that they'll be putting together as part of their FY25 budget, as well as the state in terms of funding for FY25 in the Interagency Commission on School Construction. So those are just some thought-provoking comments, perhaps, as we think about moving forward. And I think with that, staff's happy to take any questions, unless, Dr. Savine, you have any other words?
I just want to add, just as a point of emphasis, this is a plan. If you do not have items on this plan, then it's not a part of the discussion. While we have a number of projects that are needed, and it is certainly doable as you look at our historical perspective. There was a time period, 2000 through 2007-8. There were a number of projects similar to this, so it is doable. Our funding stream from the state only strengthened. Once again, just emphasizing that it is a plan, and each year we go through this process and we make appropriate updates, and it's at the pleasure of the board to make adjustments in terms of what is recommended in terms of the order.
Thank you, Dr. Savine. Thank you, Mr. Prue. Thank you, John. Colleagues, do you have any questions? Stauffer?
Concerning the school that's going to be built out here at Downsville Pike Elementary School, if that's what it's going to be called. Right now, Hickory's a Title I school. Is Fountain Rock Title I?
It is not.
So what would that do to the services provided if you combine the two schools? Would the students who now attend Hickory and they're in a Title I school, would they still receive services with the combined population? Does that make sense?
I think that remains to be seen based on a number of factors. The likelihood is that we will have to open the school for 1 year. It would not be identified, at least in the first year, as a Title I school, and it would have to demonstrate through the capturing of economic data during that first year as to whether it should be eligible for Title I services, and then it could be entered back into the Title I program as the new school, but not as Hickory. So there could be a lapse as you blend the two schools together and have a new district.
Would that be detrimental to those students who now attend Hickory in any way?
I think from my perspective, I think I would defer to some folks behind me who are educators. I think that's not a question that the facilities team could answer. I think I would defer to the team behind me if they have comments.
So, Mr. Stauffer, we've had some internal conversations as part of the Title I department about what we might be able to do, even if it's dropping one Title I school and that would potentially increase services at other schools that we might offset using general funds to help support what services weren't able to carry through with Title I. So, for example, the community events that we sponsor, we would work with the PTO or even internally to be able to use additional pay to support teachers or paraprofessionals that are leading evening activities. The tutoring funds we may offset using another grant to still be able to provide supports. To Mr. Prue's point, until we know the full economic data and the potential impact, it's probably a little too early to have that conversation, but we are at least internally beginning the thoughts of how we might be able to continue to support students who are receiving Title I funds if the new school was not Title I.
And I have a question about the proposed, and I know it's a long way down the road. Some of us might not even be here to see this to fruition, but the combination of building a combined middle high school, just some thoughts that I'm wondering about. And I know you probably can't answer them now, but I'm wondering, would there be two separate faculties? Would there be separate administrations in this gigantic school? And I was a little intrigued by the fact that the one school that you planned that would open in August of 2036 might be Clear Spring. I would have thought with Clear Spring's declining enrollment right now, and I know all this is preliminary. You don't know how things are going to change 13 years down the road maybe. But I would have thought that you would have said combining Boonesborough, since that's quite the older school, especially the high school.
I'll add a couple comments in terms of the initial thoughts conceptually. There would be two administrations and two faculties, a middle school and a high school, but you have operational savings through the cafeteria that would serve others, kind of the core, if you will, gymnasiums appropriately sized, things of that nature, administration. In terms of the location, looking at some of the pressure points in terms of our city schools and location, the fact that pretty much all of our complexes are indeed aging, but looking at, say, the Clear Spring Middle School and High School concept, you have access with reasonable potential adjustments where you could relieve some of the overcrowding at targeted city schools. The same thing holds true for the most part with Smithsburg. Also, you have access to land, which is another important consideration.
True. I think that answers it, yeah.
I would like to clarification on the Downsville Pike School. It's not going to be listed as a Downsville Pike. That's just a project name that we've given that. So I didn't want anyone to go out there and go, well, you already named it. I think we've talked about that in facilities, but they just need something to call it.
Right, and Policy FF actually lays out the parameters for how the school will officially be named, as opposed to just calling it School 1, which we did for quite some time.
I'm curious why Cascade wasn't included in the Old Forge Greenbrier project.
I think it's something, as you know, staff has looked at and played with. I think at this time we feel like we want to give some of the new development in the Cascade region an opportunity to see what happens. It doesn't mean that in a future EFMP we might not revisit that topic, but you know, there does appear to be positive movement in Cascade, and so I think we want to let that germinate a little bit before we would make any decisions on that front.
I'd just like to say that I'm pleased that we are going to address, as school number 2, the combination that would take care of those two open concept schools, Greenbrier and Old Forge, and that in the future we'll be looking at 2 others, Potomac Heights and Fountaindale. That leaves us with 1 open concept school then, Hancock Elementary School. Is that correct? At the elementary level, there may be.
Sounds about right. We've got some at the secondary level. We have middle schools that are open. But I think at the elementary level, you may be right, Mrs. Williams.
And that's if this project goes forward out here, combining Hickory and
Correct.
Fenwell.
You're right.
President Williams, you, you raise a good point as part of our discussion. Those of you that have been on the board going back to 2018, you may recall the elementaries that are listed. That was a part of a presentation at that point and does allow you to achieve progress at the elementary level. But also it continues to really not address the secondary need and so forth. But I believe, and our team members know my position there, I think any movement at any level, elementary or middle, looking at need is a positive thing in terms of our overall facility needs.
And this is it's a 10-year plan, so what you don't see is what's off the page in future years beyond 10, and we would hope that once we got started with a program that we can continue to replace schools at least on this 2-year pace.
Just one final thing. The $122 million, that would be the 79-21 state and county, the 21 being the county match, and the state would be the 79, and that would all fall on that percentage if that we would move forward on that.
In theory, yes. I mean, 120 million, I believe, as we look at it, it's a big round number at this point, but it would be all in. So potentially land acquisition, potentially, your A&E fees. We typically ask county government to, of course, they have to pay for the land acquisition if it's necessary, and the A&E fees. So the state participates in core construction costs. Because of the structure we're in right now, which is evaluated by the state periodically, we do receive 79% funding of eligible construction costs from the state, leaving 21 cents on every dollar to local government. That is also contingent upon availability of overall funds at the state level. So it would take a significant lift on both parties. I don't think we could say today definitively that 79% of that 120 million is going to fall on state government, because it is subject to availability of overall state funds and what every other LEA is doing as well.
Yeah, I think the building itself at that size and based on current cost per square foot and the square foot allowance per student, all those factors that the state uses, I think the school would cost the building itself just a little over $100 million, 105, 108, something like that. You get the 120 because you add on all those other things that Mr. Prue was discussing. So you can expect the state maybe to pay in the $80 to $85 million range on this, and the rest would be picked up locally. All estimates out in the future, but just to help you picture it.
But to put that in perspective, if we were, let's say we were to try to fund it over a 4-year span, and really do nothing else, you're talking about 20, 21, 22 million, let's say, from the state government. In FY24, we're receiving the largest allocation we've received in a number of years, in part because the governor infused additional money into the state's capital improvement program, and we're receiving $14.5 million. So it'd still be a significant lift to get to that 22 million.
So you say approximately 45 million and 120 million for the two schools. How long would it take for those, let's just bring up the school out front here. How long would it take for the two elementary schools currently for us to be able to spend 45 million on maintenance of those buildings? Does that make sense? And I know it's not the same, every school is different, but.
I don't know that I have the number off the top of my head. I think we'd have to take a look at what systems would have to be replaced in each of those buildings to maintain them. And is there any other upgrade that the board would want to make in those buildings? For instance, would you want to take them from being open schools and closing them? And I think when you start adding those numbers together about, let's say, closing in the schools, replacing HVAC, upgrading electrical distributions, I don't think it would take very long before you'd hit that 45 million mark. Okay. And just maintaining them as is. I mean, they would need full modernization. Typically, full modernization costs about as much as the new construction. Specifically, one of the things we would want to consider, let's say, with the Fountain Rock property is, if we want to maintain it long term, do we want it on public utilities, meaning water and sewer? The estimate, we received from county government to extend water and sewer to that property is $8 million. So at $8 million, you're going to dip into the $45 million quick, and you haven't touched the building yet. All you've done is brought public utilities to it. So that's just one of the things to consider if we wanted to maintain them.
According to the newspaper, we don't want public utilities, but that's a bad joke. But and then what will the new buildings be able to offer that's not currently offered at the current buildings that will help the kids be more successful? Like what in other words, what will they be able to do in the new building that they can't currently do in the old one?
I don't know that there's anything that they can't currently do. I would, and again, I would defer to our educators, but my overall sense is, from an educational sufficiency and performance, providing the opportunity to educate the students in closed classrooms as opposed to open buildings makes the educational process smoother and more effective. And so the opportunity for our students to grow better and learn better in a closed environment in a single classroom without the distractions that's coming over from whatever partition it is, whether it's a fabric partition, whether it's a bookcase, a cabinet that creates the wall and the barrier from the hallway or the classroom next to you, that creates a distraction for students when it comes to learning. And so I think my gut would be, and I don't have the science or the study here to reinforce that for you, but my gut would be that's how they would perform better, and that would make the school a better place for the students.
Okay, thank you.
Security would be a lot better, too.
Its security would be far better, absolutely.
I think one of the other intangible benefits, and Dr. Sabine pointed this out in his conclusion, was that, the construction activities on site will not interfere with those facilities. So if we did do a modernization at either of those facilities, we would have to look at temporary classrooms or things that would disrupt the current educational process for the duration of the project. Constructing it out here, you don't have that interruption. It's away from the students. It's safer. It provides things, and while that's not measurable, it is something to consider.
And we also got to look at the fact that it's saving the taxpayers from buying land somewhere for this school, correct?
Right, the land is available, and we've considered, one of the things that staff's considered is we talked about earlier, bringing you a fiscally responsible plan. We feel like, at least from that perspective, that sure, could we go to each site and say, we're going to modernize, we're going to renovate, or tear down, rebuild, whatever it takes. But we could combine them for $22 million less than it would be to modernize them or replace them, each individually.
Thank you, Mr. Gesford. Your question kind of led into one that I was percolating here, and I know what information I'm trying to elicit, but I'm not sure that my question will make sense, so bear with me here. The next elementary school, that would be the combination Greenbrier Old Forge, is scheduled for completion in 2029.
Right.
And the what's being considered as the middle senior high school in 2032. That's 5 years out, 8 years out. At what point do we start looking seriously at land acquisition? How, is that something we start tomorrow, in 2 years? Given that these two schools stay in future plans?
So based on your approval of the plan, we would start working with the county as soon as possible, almost immediately, to start trying to identify parcels that would be appropriate and in the right area and that would handle the school and public utilities or availability utilities or alternative plans for that. So we would start looking at land seriously.
Appropriate roads.
Yes, appropriate roads, thank you. We would start looking almost immediately because it can take some time to find that land and get it purchased. So even if the plan was delayed beyond the 5 and the 8 years, just banking the land if it's still in our plans to do so. So,
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. Any other questions, colleagues? Mr. Prue, anything else you would like us to know? Mr. Rollins?
I don't think anything from me in closing. Thank you for the opportunity.
thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Savine? Okay, if there's nothing further, then we'll bring this to a close, and we will meet again in the conference room at 3 o'clock. We'll see you then. Thank you all.
Thank you.